Hello and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to show you how to build a full stack application using Node, React, SQLite and Material UI. The application is a Nodes app where the user can enter the title of the node, the text body, and then send the node to the database backend to be stored. The backend will send the list of nodes to React frontend to be displayed to the user. The user can create a node, edit a node, or delete a node. Material UI was used for styles. So let's go. In order to begin, create a directory where you will place your server part and front-end part, like I have done this here. So I have created a directory called Nodes app, and I've placed my server application here and front-end application beside that. This is more convenient because you keep your job close to each other, so you don't have to switch far away from one directory to another one. I'm not going to build the whole application from the start because that will make this video incredibly long, and I really don't want to stay like 2-3 hours here doing this. So I'm going to show you the code, and I'm going to walk you through that code and explain what's happening. So I'm going to open the server part. So Nodes app, here we are. Oh, and I'm using Visual Studio Code. For those who don't know, I prefer using Visual Studio Code because it's free, it's versatile, it's very powerful IDE for web development, and most users use it. So if you are new to web development, I highly recommend you start using that. But you can use anything else you're accustomed to if you don't want to use VS Code. So the server application consists of 3 main files: the index file, the database definition file, and a utility file. What you need to do, you need to wait, what there? You need to go to the server directory, and from there you need to type npm init and y to initialize your application, and that will create a default setting for everything. After you do that, you will need to install some dependencies. Those dependencies are Express, Body Parser, Course, and SQLite 3. And you need to install a dev dependency, which is NodeMon, but that's a bit later. So what you need to do is npm install, and you need to say SQLite 3 body parser course, and what was the last one? Oh, Express. And Express, of course. So after you have installed all these, you need to do npm install -d, which means you will install the package as a dev dependency, and you need to install NodeMon. Okay, that will make your application ready to go. So you need to create a script that you will call dev, and that script will make you run NodeMon on index.js. So in this case, if you go to, if we say npm run dev, that will make NodeMon run the index.js file. This is good because if you want to make changes, and you will make changes while developing, right? So when you are going to make changes, you will not have to call Node.js all the time to run your application. NodeMon will take care of that. It will just restart itself. It will restart the application. So I'm stopping that now. So let's go and take a look on the application itself. If you are new to Node.js, then what's going on here is that you create various variables that correspond to the utilities that you are going to use. Like Express is a library that is specialized in writing server applications for Node, and you require the library itself by calling its name. Like this way, you say that Express, you define a constant that is Express, and you require the library, and that library will be called, and that instance will be created and stored in the Express constant. The same goes for course. Course is a cross-origin reference, and some sites don't allow cross-origin requests if the requests are made from scripts from the browser. To overcome this, you need to install a library like course to allow you to do so. So you do the same as you've done for Express. You define a constant that is called course, and you require the library, the package. After that, you create an application, an Express application, by defining a constant app that calls the Express constructor. You do the same for body parser. Body parser is a utility or a middleware that is useful for parsing the body of your requests. So for example, in your browser, you put in the URL, you put a parameter there or an ID, or you send some data within the request, and body parser can retrieve that information for you. The server will utilize body parser to parse the incoming request and grabbing the information that is stored there. Next, we have a utility function called normalize port. Normalize port is doing something very simple. It just takes an incoming port value. It's supposed to be a port value. It parses that as a decimal number, and it examines the result, whether the result is a number. If it is not a number, then we have something called named pipe, and named pipe are used in Linux, mostly on Unix servers, which means you don't exactly specify a number as a port, but you specify an entity, a named entity, a string entity. Other than that, if the port is greater than 0, which means it's a legal port number, then we return that. If we have a negative number, then we return false, because that's a nonsense. And of course, we export the name of the function, which is normalize port. We use camel case here for naming the functions, and we call that function on something called process. The environment, the port. The default port for Node.js application is stored in port, which is part of the environmental variables for Node. If that is not available, we use port number 5000. This is mostly standard. We also tell Express that we are going to use body parser, and we tell that we are going to use JSON data format. And we also tell Express that we are going to use a public folder that is called where the front-end application to be stored. You can do this. You need to create the public folder here. Okay. And when you create a front-end application, usually after you finish building that, you build it as a dist. You build it for production quality, and you take the package, the resulting package, and you place it here in the public folder. and you tell Node.js that there is a static folder and it is named public, where all the assets for the front end are stored. So when the user writes the URL address of the server, of the site, of the web application, first thing that Node.js will do is grab that package that is stored in the public folder, and it will send it back to the client, to the browser. After that, we are telling the application that we are going to use cores for the reasons that I have described before. And we are going to use the database object that we will be creating, which I have created already, but I'm going to explain why and how. And we define here the routes that we are going to process. Our application usually will not use any other route than nodes. This is the main route where the nodes will be called, stored, or post to, modified, deleted, etc. But before I continue with the description, I'm going to go to the database file and describe what's happening there. What's happening there is the following. I'm going to require the SQL instance from the SQLite module. I'm going to create a database name, and that database name will be stored in the DB folder. I'm going to create a DB folder, and I'm going to store a file for SQLite called notes.db. Okay? Usually that's the best thing you can do. You create a folder for your database, and you place your database file there. And if you have any SQL instructions or queries that you are going to execute or try, you place them there. If you have some scripts that you need to execute at the start of your application, you can place them there as well and call them when the application starts. First, we are declaring the variable that we are going to export, and we are assigning null to it at this moment. Then we are defining a function that will prepare our database. That function will receive the name of the database, and it will return a new database instance where it will open the name of the database file inside the database directory, the DB directory, and it will open that instance for reading or writing, or if that database doesn't exist, it will open it, it will create it. It will create a new database file. Now, I'm executing that function that I have defined. So I'm creating the database instance here. And after that, I'm going to, I'm executing some instructions on that instance, which are normal SQL instructions. I'm creating a table. If it is not existing, then I'm creating a new table called nodes. That table consists of 3 columns, an ID, and that ID is an integer, and it is a primary key. And I'm going to use dates for that ID, because every node will be created at a certain moment in time, so that that makes a perfect candidate for an ID. And every node will contain a title and a body, and those are of type text. And I'm telling SQLite that that I don't need a row ID for that, because I'm going to use the node ID itself. Now I'm running that SQL statement, and I'm telling SQLite that I'm not sending any parameters there. You will see a bit later that you can add some placeholders inside an SQL statement, and then you can send some parameters inside your SQL statement. And if we have any errors, then I'm going to throw some exception that there is an error creating that table or something. And that's basically it. I have additional code here that I'm not using, so I'm not going to mention that. I'm creating an object and I'm wrapping that database instance inside that object. You don't need to do that. You can export the instance itself directly. But I have done that this way because I thought I might add some functionalities in the future. But anyways, so I'm exporting that object and I'm going to index.js and I'm going to require that instance. I'm going to require that database object that I have created, and I'm going to extract the database instance from that object. Next, I have described what is going to happen for the main route. Well, actually, okay, if I call the main route, which means the main address of the server, let me check actually. Did I even? Okay, so I have this. I'm going to open the front end, although probably oops. Yeah, okay. Just wanted to show you something. Actually, I don't need that. So if I do localhost 5000, I get the message that I have programmed here, which is hello there. Okay, so this confirms that the server is working. Of course, the server starts to work after executing this statement. The app that you have created, the Express app, starts listening on the port that you have defined, on the IP address that you have provided. You can write either the localhost name, like localhost as a word, or the IP address of your local machine, which is 127.0.0.1. And what is going to happen when this application starts, it will tell you that the server is listening on the port that you have provided here. So server is listening on port 5000. Okay, and now I'm going to define the now I'm going to explain the routes that I have defined here. So let me stop now and explain in a bit. So I'm defining a route called nodes. All my operations will be on that route. So I'm going to get my nodes from the nodes route, and in that case I'm receiving a request and a response. Actually, the request is not needed here. It's just for completion. What I'm going to do is that I'm going to take the database instance. If you are going to receive more than one row, then you use the all function from SQLite. You need to go and see the SQLite documentation for that. And the SQL statement that I'm using is this. You simply select everything from the nodes table. And if there is any error, then you send the error message. Otherwise, you are receiving results and you are displaying the results to the server, and you are sending the results as a JSON data to the client. As you can see, this is the console log message on the server part. So I'm receiving all these rows from the table, okay, and my application here is receiving all these rows and displaying them with style. If you receive a post request, in that case, I'm taking the request parameter and I'm parsing that. Remember, I used the body parser in order to do exactly this. I'm taking the request parameter that I have received. I'm taking a look at its body using body parser, and I'm extracting note ID, note title, note body. I'm storing those in variables. Of course, I can display. This is not a needed statement, but you can use that just to show yourself that there is something going on. Okay. After that, I'm taking the database instance that I have created, and I'm running the SQL statement. Remember, you are running only one statement. You are not receiving a data set. And in that case, it's enough to use the run statement. In that case, you insert the SQL statement that you want to execute, which is insert into table nodes, insert for the note ID, the note title, the note body, and here is the important part, values and question marks, which tell SQLite that you are going to send parameters additionally. Those parameters are sent in the order that they are going to be used inside an array. So you place the parameters inside an array notation, and you send them in the order that you are going to use inside SQLite. So here in this particular example, I'm using note ID first, then note title second, then note body. Hence, I'm sending note ID first, note title secondly, and note body at the third place. Again, if we have any errors, then we are displaying the errors and we are sending an error message to the client. Otherwise, I'm selecting all the nodes that I have already created, and I'm sending them back because this is an update, okay? I mean, you have created a node already, you have changed the database already, and hence the user needs to see all the nodes that have been created. So this is kind of an update, okay? So again, if there is an error, then you display the error. Otherwise, you use the the response parameter to send a JSON data that contains the results. This get request for a node. If you want to get a particular node, then you need to know the node ID. I didn't use this in the application itself. I mean, the application doesn't take advantage of that because what I'm doing is just posting a node and getting all the nodes. But if you need to use the node ID, you need to use the node ID if you are going to modify a particular node, which I'm going to use a bit later. But here in this instance, you don't need to get a node. But anyway, you do that the same way. You take the request parameter, you take a look at the parameter, because since this is added to the route, then it is a parameter, it's not a body, and you extract from the parameters the node ID. You construct an SQL statement and you say select node title, node body from nodes where, and this is the important part, the node ID equals to, you have a question mark here because you're going to supply the node ID later, and you run that because you will receive only one row or nothing. So in that case, you run the SQL statement and you supply the node ID that goes here. And if you have an error, you display that error. Or, well, this is not necessary, but anyway. Otherwise, you just send the results. I think this is kind of a mistake here, but anyway, I didn't use that statement, so it didn't show itself. Now, This is one important operation, which is put. Put means modification. You modify a certain row in the table, in the database. You send a request that contains the ID of the node that you want to modify, and you send also the data that will modify the previous node, and you overwrite that. So what I'm doing here is the same that you have seen before. The parameters in the request contain the node ID. Remember, this exists on the URL itself, hence it's a parameter, it's not part of the body. But the title of the node and the body of the node are sent within the body. Hence, I'm going to extract them from the body. Okay. After that, I'm doing an update operation on the SQL instance. So update nodes, set node title, node body, where the node ID is something. Notice here, we are using node title and node body before using node ID. Hence, we need to run the SQL statement using the supplied parameters in that particular order. So I'm not sending node ID first. I'm sending node ID as the last one, in the same order that it appears in the statement. So node title goes here, node body goes here, and node ID goes there. Again, if we have an error, we are displaying the error. Otherwise, if the operation is successful, then we are going to select all the rows, all the nodes, and send them to the user. The same goes for deletion. Deletion relies on receiving a node ID in the parameters. Again, we are extracting the node ID from the parameters, not from the body, from the parameter. We are creating an SQL statement, which is delete from nodes, where the node ID is this. And we are running the SQL statement, which is supplied by the ID. Again, if you have an error, you're displaying that error. Otherwise, you are selecting all the updated nodes, the updated list of the nodes, and you are sending that list to the user as a JSON data. And that's it. That's the server. So I'm going to explain now the front end. So now we are going to talk about how to create the front end part of the application. In the directory that contains both applications, the front end and the server part, open a terminal or a DOS prompt or a bash, and you need to type npx create react app, and the name of your application should go here, and in our case it is Nodes app front end. We are going to use TypeScript, so you need to type template and then TypeScript. And if you are going to use well, it depends on whether you are going to use npm or the yarn. I'm not exactly used to yarn, so I'm going to use usually npm. So in that case, you just type here use npm, and that should create an application folder called Nodes app front end, and it will initialize TypeScript according to a built-in template provided by by Create React App. And you will be using npm because of this switch. Now, if you have an older version of Create React App that you have installed using npm previously, then you need to uninstall that. Previously you have done something like create React app, the name of the application, and something else like TypeScript switch, for example. And that was using an older version of the application of create React app. And you need to make sure that you have the latest version of Node.js in order to use MPX with all the capabilities provided. So I have already done that, so I'm not going to execute this command because it's, for me it's a waste of time. So I'm going to go to the folder that I have the application created in, and I'm going to create to open that with Visual Studio Code, as you have seen here. The main script that you are going to use is this one, start, and you run that using either yarn start or npm start. In my case, it's npm. If you want to include Sass, which I have done before I've switched to Material UI, you can install SassLint and Sass as well, and you can start creating your styles using Sass. But since I've switched to Material UI, I'm not going to talk about that. You need to install Material UI core and Material UI icons. That's not included with the application itself. If you want to do some testing, you need to install TypeSiest. And that's it. That's all you need for the installation phase. If you take a look at tsconfig is being created by Create React App if you want to use TypeScript. So this configuration file for TypeScript will tell the compiler, the transpiler for the TypeScript, that you are going to use JSX with the flavor of React. And your target is ES, by default it is ES5, but I've changed that to ES6 because I just can't stand ES5. And the module that they are going to use for transpiling is ESNext, which is the latest of ECMAScript. What else you need to know? I think that's it here. So Create React App also initializes a Git repository for you. If you have a remote repository, then it should be included here. I don't have it here exactly per se. But there should be here a switch called I think repository or remote or something like that, and it indicates the address of the repository on GitHub, for example. This is strange. This should be here. But okay, anyway, never mind. What else? Okay, the application contains a public folder that contains an index.html. This is created by the utility by Create React App. The most important thing that you need to know is in the body element, you will have a div that has an ID of root. Here goes your React application. And when you build your application, React will inject the resulting application here in this division. What else you need to know? By default, you will get some icons, default icons and default assets that I have deleted. You don't need those. So of course I'm going to leave the link to my GitHub repositories, so you can of course clone my repository and take a look on that yourself with instructions of how to install and run the application. So there is no worries. You can just check this video and then play with the code yourself after that. There is a manifest JSON file. You don't need to mess with that. You can leave it as is. Node modules folder is where all the modules that you are going to install from Node, from npm are stored. All right, we can now start talking about the application itself. The main folder, the main file is index.tsx. When you create a React app that utilizes TypeScript, it will name all the components, all the component files with the extension of tsx. React components are either JS files or tsx files. I think JSX files, but I don't care because I don't use JavaScript. I use only TypeScript. But anyway, so the component, if you want to create interfaces, for example, without outside of your component files, then you create regular TypeScript files with the extension of TS, and you import them to your components. So here we are importing React, and we are importing React DOM from React DOM. And you can import your CSS files directly into your TypeScript file if you have any external CSS. And the main application component is called app, and it is stored in the app file, app.tsx. And you render your application, your component inside this tag, and you target the root, the element that has the root ID. This is the main application file. So I have two folders. One folder for components, and it has all these components. I'm going to explain that later. And I have another folder for the interfaces. These are regular TypeScript interfaces that I'm going to talk about in a bit. So going to the components folder, I have the main component, which is app. If you take a look on that, it imports two components. One is the header component, the other is the content component. And the content component is the one responsible for making any AJAX calls and fetch calls to the database. And it is also responsible for distributing that data into child components. The app component doesn't do anything much. It just displays the header component and the content component. So what I'm doing here is I'm importing the interfaces, the declarations that I need, and I'm defining a state interface for my component. My component extends the pure component class from React. It takes any as properties, as props, and the state will be of type app state. So if I take a look on the interfaces, oops. So if I take a look on app state, there is nothing there. There is only one switch that tells me whether the data is loaded or not. And that's not exactly an important switch. It's there just because I had it there when I started developing the application. I stopped using that, but I have left there. So you set the state of the component to any data you want. This is not needed. So the main important thing here is the rendering part of the component. I'm returning a JSX element, which takes a class name called app, and it displays the component header and the component content. So I'm going to jump into the header because it's a small one. Here I'm importing these utility functions from Material UI styles, from the core styles, and I'm importing an application bar, a toolbar, a typography, an icon button, and I'm going to show you exactly what is this Material UI actually. This is the website of Material UI. If you go to get started, it's something similar to Bootstrap, but it's associated with React applications mostly. So I've used it for convenience. This is how you install Material UI using npm and how to use that Material UI inside your applications. So this is an explanation. You can go to that yourself. So I went to components and I took a look on actually surfaces, and I went to app bar and I've chosen this. If you click on this button, every component here has a bunch of buttons. One of them is this one, which shows you the source that you need to incorporate into your application. And there are two variants, the JavaScript variant and the TypeScript variant. So if you're using TypeScript, make sure that you are using this one. You click that button, you copy this code, and you place it either in a separate file or inside your components file. So in my case, I have included the app bar, toolbar, typography, icon button. I have included the header CSS. I'm not sure if this is needed at all. There is a lot of SAS information here, but I think I didn't use it. Anyway, you use the use styles hook actually, and because this is a function component, it doesn't have states, so it's just using the use styles from Material UI as such. And I'm returning just a header HTML tag. That's the standard tag. And I'm assigning a class name of classes.root, and this is one that you have defined here. So classes is actually this, okay, and it executes use styles, and you can reference the root class name inside your element. And these are just copied from Material UI. I didn't change those, okay. Probably I have added menu button. Yes, that's menu button and title from the style here. I've changed that the code a bit because there were some information that I didn't need. For example, here I didn't need how do you call it, the accordion menu, and I didn't need the login button, so I've deleted them, and I've changed the text for the label, so nothing more extra to that. And I'm exporting, of course, I'm exporting that component as such, so I'm receiving a JSX element that I'm going to display. So if I go back to the app TSX, as you can see, I have the header component here that receives a JSX element that you have seen previously. So now going to the content component. The content component is a big one. So I'm going to explain that to you. I'm defining the content component to be a subclass of the pure component. It receives props of type any, and it has a state of type content state. So if we go to the declarations, to the content state has a switch which is data loaded. This is the one that we are actually going to use probably, I think. And it has an array of type inode. The inode, the interface for node, is here, which is here. The inode is this, and it defines the ID, which is of type number, the title of the node, which is string, and the body of the node, which is string. And it has I'm going to be having an array of those, and I'm going to store that array in a variable called nodes. So going back to content. So the props would be of type props, but they should be of type any, but never mind. I think this is a mistake. Okay, I'm defining the state of the component in the constructor of the component. So I'm telling the data whether the data will be loaded, which is false, and I'm telling the array that contains the nodes is empty at this moment. I'm defining some handles, and I'm going to explain those handles in a bit. So if I go to the JSX code, I'm using a component called node form, and that component is responsible for the for this form, for the title, for entering the title, the body, and the button. And that component receives a handler to the button being pressed. When you press the button, you will execute this handler, and it will take care of the data. So so this handler, it receives the title of the node and the body of the node. Now, what's happening when you receive actually a new node? Let's say that I don't know. So what we have here, buy food. Let's say pay bills. First, let me check if the application is running or not. Yeah, the server is running. And let me see. Yeah, the application is not running. Okay, so I'm going to run that. Okay. Okay, so the application is running now, and I can enter a new node. In this case, I'm going to say pay the bills. And the body of the node is something like, I need to pay the electricity, gas, internet, and rental. Okay, and I'm going to press this button and see what's going to happen. Watch the server window. Okay, so I have received at the server part, I have received a post on the nodes route, a request, and an ID for the node was created, not on the server, the ID was created on the client. I'm going to explain that. And the title of the node is pay the bills. The body of the node is I need to pay the electricity, blah, 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 and the text that you have seen. So if I go down, I see that the node has been created. I see it there. And a time of the time of the creation of the node is displayed as well. So what happened here is that if I go to the code, I go to the node form. I think this is the node form. The button has a handle called add node. Now we are talking about the form component. We are not talking about the parent component, the content component. Okay, so we are now in the node form, and on the button that I have pressed, we have a handle called add node. This button takes the node title, which is stored inside a state of the component. So the state of the component contains the title and the body, and it's going to check whether the title or the body are empty, because if I just press the button here without having any text inside the component, then I'm not going to receive anything. The application won't do anything. But if I have any data, then I'm going to pass the title and the body of the node to the handle that is provided as part of the props from the parent component. And after that, I'm going to set the title and body here inside the component itself to an empty string. So you enter a text and you add the node, and the text clears here after adding that node. So you can enter something else. If I go to content, okay. So I'm sending that. There are two handlers. One handle is here, and the other handle is inside that component itself called add node. But here in the content component, the add node is going to be is responsible for calling the database, is responsible for calling the backend. So what I'm doing here is I'm receiving the title. Remember, the node form component is sending me the title and the body of the node, of the new node. So I'm forming an instance, a variable of type inode, and I'm going to create an ID for that at this very moment. So I'm going to assign a date now value. This will create a number representation of the very moment the node was created. And of course, I'm assigning the title for the node and the body for the node according to the data that I have received from the node form component. I'm going to create a headers variable, and I'm talking here about using the fetch API. Now we are going to use the fetch API, and for that we are creating headers for the call. We are going to create to append the content type of the request, which is application JSON, and we are going to create a request that contains the URL of the request, which is the address of the application. Of course, if you have a domain and you have the address of that domain, and for example, I don't know, google.com, for example, okay? So if you are working at Google and you create an application that is using Google, for example, or Amazon or whatever, then you place the address of that server here. But since we are doing our development locally, then I'm using localhost and I'm using the port of 5000 at this moment. And of course, I'm putting the route that I'm going to address, which is nodes. I'm specifying this is the option object that you can attach to a request. And in this option object, I'm specifying the method type, which is post, and I'm assigning the headers that I have created here. I'm assigning to the headers parameter, and in the body of the request, I'm sending a string representation of the object that I have created, of the node that I have created. So I'm using JSON stringify, and I'm telling that I'm using course, which is the default, I think. And then after that, I'm calling fetch. So after I've called fetch, I'm taking a look at the response that I have received. If the status of that response is 200, which means the status is okay, then that means my call was successful. I'm displaying a message that the node was saved, and that's the debugging message. You don't need that. And I'm returning a JSON representation of the request, of the response, sorry. And after that, then this data is actually the JSON representation of the response. And after that, I'm setting the state of this component of content to be nodes data, which means nodes now contain the data that I have received. Okay, and I'm toggling the data loaded switch. I'm not exactly using this one, but it's good to indicate to React that something has happened, something has changed. So React would re-render the component. Of course, I'm displaying any errors that I have received. So this is the handle for adding the node that is called inside the child component, inside node form. Okay, so node form receives so these are the props that node form receives, and inside those, inside the iFunction interface, which you need to see now. So if I say, yeah, the iFunction contains the handle add node from the content component. Okay, so the node form receives this handler from the content component. So of course, if you are using JavaScript, then you need to bind this to the method that you are going to use, otherwise this won't work. Okay, so whenever you use a handler or something inside the class, then you need to tell JavaScript or TypeScript that you are binding the object, the instance of the object, this pointer to the object itself. Okay, here I'm calling handle add nodes from the props that I have received, as you can see. Okay, I will be explaining the node form further in a bit. I'm just going to go back to content to explain what's happening next. So okay, so I'm displaying the node form, and in case I don't have any data in the server, and I'm testing this condition. If the nodes state is undefined, or if the length of the nodes array is below less than 1, then there are no nodes to show. And I'm displaying this component, this small component. Otherwise, I'm creating the components, which will be an array of the nodes data that I have received from the database. And create node is going to create a one node component that will receive a key of the ID of the node. Remember, if you have many components of the same type, for example, a node component, a list item component, for example, if you have an unordered list that contain, or an ordered list that contain many list items, like 10 list items, anything more than 2, anything more than 1 actually, then you need to assign a key to that component so React can distinguish between the similar items. In this case, I'm assigning the node ID to each key. I'm not sure if that was correct in English. Okay, every node or every component has a key, and that key will be the node ID of the relevant node. Okay, so the node ID will be sent as well as a prop. The title and the body will be sent to the component as well as props. There will be two handlers, one that will be responsible for deleting the node. For example, if you press that button, then you are deleting that node. So this will take care of that. And if you want to edit the node, clicking on that button, then this handler will be responsible for doing that. And let me explain the delete one. So here, deleting the node, you receive the ID of the node that you want to delete. And we check whether this ID is a number or not, or whether it's undefined, because simply you never know. You probably might do an error, you might press something wrong, or so we need to have some fail-safe. We create a variable that is the actual state that will receive the actual nodes array. Okay, I think this wasn't needed. We find yeah, okay. If we find the current value that we are trying to delete, the current value is the index actually. The current is the actual node that I'm trying to delete. So we check whether the ID of that node is the ID that I'm searching for. And if yes, then I'm returning the index of that. And after that, I'm creating a header because I'm going to make a call. And I'm appending the application, I'm appending the type of the application, which is JSON, application JSON, the content type. I'm creating a request just as you have seen previously. And for that request, I'm sending the ID that I have received for deleting. And I'm attaching that ID to the route URL. And I'm telling that the method that I'm going to use this time is delete. And the headers are going to the headers parameter. The body is empty. And of course, I'm allowing course. And I'm making the call to the fetch. If I'm receiving a response, then I'm returning that response as a JSON representation, and which is this. And after that, I'm setting the state in the component, in the content component, to this data that I have received. Remember, when you delete a node, you will receive an update. You will receive all the nodes that are remaining on the server. So the user can see the updated version of what's happening at this moment. And of course, I'm toggling the switch that the data has been changed. Of course, I'm catching also any errors that might occur. When you start the application, you will run the application will run the constructor first. It will construct the component, and it will render it on the display. After the application, after React applications has been displayed, after the component has been incorporated into the DOM, then there is the component did mount lifecycle will execute. And this is the place where I do a fetch nodes. The fetch nodes is a Ajax call, is a fetch API call to the server where I get all the nodes that I have on the database. Okay, and the code is very similar to the one that I have provided for deleting and for updating. Okay, so we just fetch using the URL, which is this. You go to the notes route. If you get a response, you check the status of the response. You send then the JSON representation of the call. If there are any errors, you throw the error. And then you set the state for that component using the JSON representation that you have received, for example here. Okay, and you make a switch toggle. You don't need force update here. I think it was an older version before I cleaned the code. Sometimes you need to force update in the application, but it's not this case. That's an old code. What else? So delete node was explained. Okay, suppose if you click on the edit node, let's check that. Okay, then a modal dialog will be displayed, and you can either cancel that and nothing will happen, or you can change the data here. For example, study, oops, let's say study hard because knowledge is power. Okay, so if I press accept here, the node has been changed to this data, and that's because, let me first show, receiving a put request with the node ID, and this is the node ID, and this is the data that changed. So the title now is study hard, and the node body is because knowledge is power. What happened here is this. If you go to the node component, the node component is responsible for displaying a node card, and the node card actually contain the button. So this is the button that is responsible for editing the node, for executing the handler for editing the node. Of course, there are two handlers, one for this button particularly, and the other one that is responsible for calling the database. This handler add node, which is here somewhere, add node does nothing. It just opens the dialog. It sets the dialog to get open. Close dialog is, yeah, I think so. Yeah, okay. So you open the dialog by this, and when you close, when you press the accept, button, then this guy gets executed, and it receives the modified data, which is title and button that we have edited. Again, we test whether, let's say, I don't know. Okay, so if the title and body are empty, which means we didn't change anything, then we just close the dialog and we do nothing. But otherwise, if we have any data in the title and body, then we close the dialog, but we also call the handler from the parent component that is responsible for calling the database. And we are sending also the node ID for this particular. Remember, this is a node card, and it has in the state, it has the node ID, the node title, and the node body. this is called by the node, and the node itself receives the handle delete node and handle delete edit nodes from its parent itself, and that parent is content. That parent is content here. So if I take a look, yeah. So here in content, I'm creating a node component, and that node component is receiving inside the props an edit and a delete node handlers. Okay, so these are the handlers here. This is the delete one, and this is the handler. So if I go back to node, okay, node is creating a node card inside, and that node card is utilizing two handlers, the add node and del node, and the add node is just opening the dialog, and when you close that dialog with a data, of course, if there is if you cancel the dialog, then there is nothing is happening. It just closes the dialog. But if you which is done by this, if there is data, then you call the handler that you have received from the props, and that handler is responsible for calling the database. So as you can see, you receive the ID, title, body, and you create a fetch call. You create a header request, and you do the fetch, and you call the database and updating the data. So you yes, I've explained that you create the form. If you don't have anything to show, then you display this message. Otherwise, you have many nodes, and you create for each one of them a node component. This is the part that is responsible for creating all these nodes. Okay, each iteration takes an item, a node item, and creates a box inside the content, and that box contains also this button, these two buttons, and that label. So if you go to the node card, so node card, so I have this is the deepest component, the child of everything. So every node is contained in a node card, and that node card receives the ID, the title, the body, etc. You have already, and this is this is done using hooks, because there is no need to create a class for that. It was easier to use hooks for that. So if you don't know how to use hooks, then I recommend you take a look on the documentation of React. Basically, what is done here is that you define the states, the state variables, and you define functions that are responsible for changing those states. And you tell that those functions are actually the state changers by calling useState. useState is a hook, and you are telling each you are telling React, since you are using TypeScript, that for each state, the type of the state, the type of the data that to be expected. For instance, if you want to change the node ID, then you are going to change a number, okay? Because node ID is a number. So you cannot put a string here. If you put a string here, the application will crash with an error, and it will show you that there is an error here because we are expecting a number. Same goes for string. And we have a boolean here for open or set open the dialog for editing. I'm defining a function here called datetime, I'm receiving the ID. This is the node ID, and I'm transforming that node ID into a date and time. So I'm creating a date object, and I'm adding a time information to that, and I'm returning the result. This is this label here. You have seen the delete node, which takes the node ID, and node ID is stored in the state, as you see. And then after that, it calls the delete node that is supplied in the props. So delete node is here. That's the local delete node that calls the parent delete node. Okay. The edit card is controlled by this switch, so this can be either true or false, and this decides whether the dialog for editing the node should be opened or not. And closing the dialog is here. And I think that's it for the node. Okay, so the components that I have used from Material UI are the card action, I have copied all this from the Material UI. So if you go to surfaces in the components, so if you have components here, you go to surfaces, you go to card. Okay. You pick whatever card type you want. I'm not sure which one I've picked. I think I've picked this one, and I have changed that. So you can take a look on that and see for yourself. So this is the code that you use basically. There is a card actions, card content, button, typography, blah blah blah, and that's it. You can modify, of course, the information here based on your needs. Yeah, I think, yeah, and the edit, let me, this dialog is also part of Material UI, and it's, I think here, lab, nope, feedback dialog, yeah, this is a dialog component, and I have used, I think, form dialog, yeah, so I have modified this. So I've I have deleted the content here and added some information, some other components. So you can copy that and put it in a separate file like I have done. So edit card is here. I have modified this file based on the template from Material UI website. Yeah, these are handlers for the dialog itself. So the title, the body, changing inside the here. So these two components here, you change them, and if you press cancel, then you do nothing. Or if you press accept, you close that and you send the data to the close dialog. Okay. For the text fields that you have here, so you supply this handler, the handle change node title, which will set the title to the target value, or if you have the body, you change that also here. Okay, and then of course you have close handler and close accept. Okay, and this is used in node card. So this edit card component is used here, and I think that's basically all you need to know. Let me check also. So the node form, yeah, node form was discussed. The node card, the node component is just a wrapper around the node card. That's it. I could probably use only node card, but that would be very lengthy, so I had to cut the text a bit. So I wrapped the node card inside this. Of course, make sure to notice what type are the props that you are receiving, and what is the type of the state. So I think yeah, I think that's it. So back to content. Yeah, I have discussed everything here. Okay, so that makes it for this application. Make sure to check the repository. I will leave the links to the server and to the front end parts in the description of this video. And if you have any questions, of course, leave them in the comments below, and I will be checking them later. If you have any other suggestions, feel free to express them. And let me just check whether everything has been discussed. Yeah, I think everything has been discussed. Yeah, okay, so that makes it. Thank you for listening so far. If you have any comments, as I said, we'll leave them in the comment section. If you think that this content is worthy, then please like and subscribe. See you in the next time.